Okay.
Great.
Thanks, Taylor. Good evening, everybody. My name is Hannah Stewart-Lathan, and I direct our Experiential Learning and Career Services office at the CUNY School of Public Health. Welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this masterclass on transferable skills and landing the role. We are hosted by the Career Skills Academy, which is a program that is in our Office of Career Services. It's a professional skills building program that many of you are a part of, and we're happy to see you here this evening. I'm joined by my colleague Taylor Drost, who is a program manager in the Career Skills Academy and Career Services office. So she and I will be hosting today, and we're really looking forward to introducing you to our speakers, Jennifer Lee and Jie Feng. I do have one housekeeping piece of information before we get started for our CUNY students and alumni. This is for any graduate level CUNY student or alumni. Next Friday is our annual spring virtual career fair. So next Friday, April 12th from noon to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, we will be hosting that on Zoom. I'll put the information in the chat, and we hope to see all of you there for the career fair. We'll be hosting more than 35 organizations from many sectors and regions. So we hope to see you. And with that said, I will introduce our speakers today. We are joined by Jennifer Lee and Jie Feng. Jie Feng is the co-founder and CEO of Kells, an AI-powered virtual dental care platform enabling accessible and personalized oral health and benefits. Prior to Kells, Jie has founded AI startups in healthcare and retail with funding raised from Verizon and NYC-EDC. He was the recipient of the People's Choice Award at Innovative Health Tech NYC and has worked at companies including Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, where he built and launched consumer health products to the market. He received his PhD in computer science from Columbia, and his research has been published in numerous top-tier AI conferences, and he holds several U.S. patents. And with joining Jie today is Jennifer Lee, a graduate of Boston University, Columbia, and CUNY. Jen has had more than 20 years of healthcare experience working in digital health startups, occupational therapy and assistive technology, clinical practice, public health advocacy, and academia. Jen's most recent degree is an MPH from the CUNY School of Public Health in 2014. And she currently works at Samsung Electronics America on U.S. digital health partnerships and business development teams. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this wealth of wisdom and experience about how to leverage transferable skills to land dynamic roles.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, so I think let's get started with a little bit of background. So Jie, if you could tell us kind of your academic and career journey so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and great to be here. This is actually my second talk in CUNY, so very pleasure to come back. As mentioned in the intro, I've been in the technology space for over maybe 13, 14 years now. Did my PhD in Columbia on AI. And, from there, I've been mostly in the academia before that, doing research and jumping from a subfield of computer science called computer vision to a broader AI kind of specs. But more so, I think what inspires me to pursue beyond that is the ability to apply these research results to the real problems in different industries. So got the fortune to work in these big tech companies back then, and now I'm running my own company, which is really different experience. So I'm hoping to share some of that learnings as well today. But I think I would say this, like I get the fortune to experience different industries, from a pure tech to fashion to retail to healthcare now. And interesting part is that you naturally think, in different industry, you have to make a lot of changes. Surprising learning top one for me is that it's actually a lot of the transferable skill, right? Quote unquote, that you apply to them. So, really exciting to share some of that and discuss with you, hopefully to bring some kind of insights to help your journey as well. So, Jennifer, back to you. I think you have a really great, interesting, more kind of clinical, I would say, more kind of towards health, public health background. Really curious to hear like how your past kind of evolved from there.
Thanks, G. Yeah, so I also wanted to mention that G and I actually met at a HitLab summit. HitLab is a digital health organization that hosts many, many events, both virtual and in person throughout the year. And it's one of the ways, if you are interested in digital health, just to learn a little bit more about it, and more importantly, meet people like G. So G actually connected me back into CUNY. I had not really done anything with CUNY since I graduated. Sad to say, but I'm very excited to be back with all of you. So I started off as an occupational therapist. I practiced for about 12 years. I was working first in the New York City Department of Education, and then I always kind of worked with young people, some of whom had difficulty accessing their academic curriculum. And so an occupational therapist's role is to support them, whether it's to teach them some of the foundational skills needed to access the curriculum, or to perhaps modify the environment in which they are learning in, provide physical supports or sensory type supports, or offer technology that might be able to guide some of these students with accessing their curriculum by means of simple typing programs, or programs that could potentially jot down what somebody is saying. So I did that for a bit, and then I became interested in what some of the students were eating. Particularly, I noticed some children were eating sugary snacks on the way to school, and I wondered if maybe some of what they were eating had any influence on their difficulties in school. And that led me on a path to exploring food policy, which then led me to going to CUNY for public health. And I accidentally fell into the digital health world by somebody contacting me on LinkedIn, and he was starting a company, and he was looking for somebody with some clinical experience. And I just kind of went for it. I don't have I at the time didn't have any business background. And I find that when I step into roles that I don't have, 100% experience in, that's when I grow the most. And so from there, I just wanted to join other startups and learn more and more and more about the business world. And finally, I'm here at Samsung, which is, as a public health person, just the reach that we have at Samsung, literally being able to reach billions of people, is amazing. And so my hope is that through technology, we'll be able to affect health and the betterment of access to resources. So that's kind of where I ended up, constantly evolving. The topic of today is transferable skills, and with each role that I've been in, I've had to use all the skills I've built up, and kind of apply them. And we can talk about that a little bit later. So back to G. One of the questions from the audience was how to get started with your own business in healthcare, and maybe talk about some of the challenges that you've had.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. First of all, like if you're thinking about starting a business, congratulations. I think it's really something that you would think it's such a big task to do, or like it's a such difficult thing to do. But when you have the idea and you kind of take the first step, I think it's a victory already in terms of personal growth. I've always been, again, I've been mostly in academia, but during PhD that I had several experience working with students and the faculties across the departments. They're not necessarily from the tech world, but they could be from healthcare department, they could be from a business operation. So I get to talk to these people, and I think really kind of inspired me to think beyond what I've been doing, right? So, but I would say like starting business is something kind of really resulted from external forces like these iconic entrepreneurs in the tech world. It's really hard to escape their influence, like Steve Jobs and the people like that. So naturally, I was inspired to do something on my own. But the other side is the more I see the work we've been doing in the lab, the more impact I can see if we apply it to outside the lab actually, right? Because um, the work that's been doing in the lab are so state of art and so innovative. And when you take that solution, look at a system outside or market outside, it becomes very legacy. And you wonder like why isn't anyone changing those problems for decades? And why are we still having the same problem? So those are the biggest inspiration. And so in terms of like it's interesting, like how switch to healthcare is, first of all, personally, I I'm very passionate about using technology to improve humanity in the betterment of health and wellness. And health is a very broad range. So when I was thinking about what kind of area we want to do, we naturally zoom into a particular sector of it, right? And from a business sense, like I don't want to, I think you want to lower the risk of um, working on something that's highly saturated, and but you still want to solve a meaningful problem. So that's where we land in dental care and oral health. So that's just maybe lesson one is kind of identifying a kind of a real problem, but also considering the opportunity that you can make this work, right? Because it is a marathon, not a sprint. So if you basically just pick any idea and you run with it, you're likely to face a lot of challenges. And it's better to have something that you have endurance and stamina to keep going. Um, and I think there's a lot of obviously a lot of mechanical things I can talk about starting a business, like setting up entity, other things. But I think those are things I'm sure you can learn very easily. I would say like maybe the most challenging thing I've come across through this journey so far uh, is to uh, kind of finding the right people to talk to who would help you understand about the customer pain points and whether what you're doing is a real solution or it's simply something you think people want, but no one actually want to buy it, right? So if you don't have the end customer willing to pay for a solution, that you don't have a business. So I think that's a mindset, I think only when you are in the market, talking to a real customer, and iterating, several times. Actually, you're iterating all the time, right? It's endless exploration, and you will kind of tell yourself like, okay, I'm probably getting closer to what it should be. So I think those are challenging when you do it on the daily basis. Just imagine that, right? When you wake up and think about what I do next, and no one's going to tell you. It's not like in school, there's an assignment or something. It's always something that you have to figure out yourself, and you have to make a lot of key decisions for yourself and for the team. And everyone's almost like following your leadership in terms of where to spend their time. So I think when you're in that position, every decision counts. So yeah, I think I think that's probably one of the challenging place to be when you run a business. Yeah, happy to kind of share more kind of in more specific if there's a follow-up questions.
I like what you said about kind of creating your own assignments, because that really is what actually draws me to these fields of innovation. The fact that it isn't laid out, that I'm not given a task at the beginning of the day and I'm meant to turn something in at the end of the day. It really is finding what's missing, whether it's what's missing for the end user or within your organization. So I've worked at a bunch of startups, and even at a large organization like Samsung, there's always figuring out what's missing and what can make things better, either internally for your operations and your processes, or again for your end user. And I that's part of what I love, is that interaction when
Right.
possible with the end user, because if we're solving a problem that we think exists and we're not actually in the field, then there's no fit.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll comment on just kind of build on top of that. I feel like one of the ambiguity that I have experienced is like my business, like we provide a solution for the end user, which are consumers or patients or individuals, right? But they may not be the buyer who's paying for the solution. It could be the organization like the insurance companies or the healthcare organization. So I think to Jennifer's point, like you have to identify like who is your buyer and what is your solution for, because the buyer may not use your solution at all, but they buy your solution because they want their end user to experience. So this applies to healthcare more so than other industry, because I feel like healthcare has a lot of layers and complexity compared to other industries. And there's definitely more kind of ambiguity when you're looking at an organization, you're trying to find out like who should be the person I talk to. It's never easy, right? So yeah, I just want to kind of emphasize that's really something that you would focus on if you're building a business, and it's definitely not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. The navigation, when it comes to working with customers, or trying to figure out, I mean, when you talk about the healthcare system being complicated, I think in the US, healthcare is particularly complicated. And if you can figure that out, then you could probably retire. But
Yeah.
let's see, I'm looking at the questions we might want to jump to.
If you don't mind, I have a question actually. I'm curious, given your background. So it's a question about how to transfer from clinical role to non-clinical or administrative role. I personally, I feel like they're quite different and very fitting to tonight's topic about how you leverage what you have from previous job or maybe role to another one. So really curious about your take on that.
Sure. So as an occupational therapist, that's all I did. I had therapy sessions day in, day out. And when I decided to make that jump over to public health, I sort of made it my goal to reinvent myself in many, many ways. So I think what was very instrumental, at the time, it no longer exists, but there is the Public Health Association of New York City, which was an EPHA affiliate. So I immersed myself completely in, it was called FANIC, PHA NYC. And I took on various roles. There were different committees, policy committee. There was a student committee that tried to really get all of the students in New York City, public health students in New York City, to participate and to, put on conferences for one another. So in saying that, I had many, many opportunities to learn some of the skills that I've later applied to the jobs I've had. So I've had to organize events. As an occupational therapist, I never organize an event in my life. So yeah, just being able to sort of practice. I mean, this is a volunteer organization. I just do the best I can. And, any contribution is really, folks are grateful for any contribution you make. So it was kind of like no stakes in that sense. So I think finding sort of a practice ground, and I think you can do that through internships, where there's a layer of forgiveness that you don't know everything and that you're just learning and that you may make mistakes. I think being a student is a wonderful opportunity for that exploration and building skills. So if you can identify a place where you can do that, and maybe it's various places, but for me, I found that organization, FANUC, to be one of those places. I also was able to play, I call it play, a little bit within the school itself. So there were different committees at the time, and I don't know how, this was 10 years ago. For example, there's a curriculum committee. So there were some students on the curriculum committee as well as professors. And so just shaping the program. And I think that also has some applications in the startup world, right? You want to shape the direction of your company, or you want to shape the direction of your product. So that being said, I also had to come out of my shell to do all of these things. I was very comfortable just like showing up to work and working one-to-one with a young child. This was a totally different world to me. And I knew that if I wanted to progress in my career, that I would have to step out of my shell. And again, having these like playgrounds, if you will, these practice places to practice these skills was invaluable.
Yeah, I can really relate to the anecdote you mentioned about organizing events, because what's funny is that in the earlier days of Kells, we were actually doing events in the community with some of the insurance company to support the people, right? To provide dental screenings and other kind of diagnostic services. And this is much more physically heavy than just kind of writing a software and let people use an app, right? So this is really organizing workforces, like we send hygienists out and stuff like that. So which is really interesting, because this is kind of the skill that you never created before, but you need to do something like that, and you kind of force yourself to figure out how to solve that, right? So I think back to the core, some of the questions that we saw are kind of like how you stand out, how you kind of like make yourself more kind of competitive in terms of showcasing your skills. And maybe like I would zoom out a little bit, is like fundamentally it's about the person, right? Not the type of actual work or skill you do. Like when we hire people, for example, we always look at talent instead of what skills you have in particular. So what I mean by that is we look at three things, like ability to learn, communication, and problem solving, right? These things are never going to go out of time. And when you switch in different roles, you're constantly enhancing these three things, right? Or more, obviously. So I think, I think it's really interesting if you focus on the core of these skills, you actually find like every decision you're making or reinvesting yourself, which makes it much more worthy to kind of like, to kind of do the things that you like, and not to worry about, is this actually advancing a particular kind of set of things that would not be used in the next job or so, right? So I think, I think there's a lot of thinking behind your choices. And these skills I think are super valuable.
I'd also like to add to your list of good traits, just evidence that you are a hard worker, that you're goal oriented. I think that goes a long way. I'm not sure how you gauge talent, and I'd be interested to learn maybe a little bit more about that. But when I think of talent, it's not like, do you have a 4.0 GPA? It's, and this goes back to some of the soft skills that I think some folks were asking about too. It's like, how do you relate to other people? If you're in a lab and you have a microscope and your slides and maybe your bacteria, like it might be okay that, you're not a relatable person. But if you are customer facing, if you have to work in a team, I think those are some of the skills that you can't capture by test scores or by grades. And I've found that you want to, when you go to work, you want to show up and like the person that's sitting next to you. You don't have to be best friends, but you want to be able to respect one another, and hear varying opinions, and just maintain that level of respect and understanding. And I think that goes such a long way. And it's something that unfortunately I don't know if you'll be able to capture in a first interview. But I think maybe that's why some some jobs have such a lengthy interview process, is they want to test you out, with the team that you'll be working with.
Yeah, it's a great point. Actually, the especially for new kind of, I think now feel like all the university, it really has a great programs and the setup to encourage like teamwork and kind of put a realistic environment in the daily kind of a study to help like individuals to work with each other. And that's an absolutely important skill, right? When you go into the workforces and even do your own thing, it's all about human connection and communication. That's why I think those are really, really cherished skills. If you have those, I don't think, if I'm an employer, I wouldn't care less about if you're Excel experts or something, right? I would look at like, can you actually work with my team? Can you leverage what you know to teach other people to do better? Things like that, right? So those will be a good investment for yourself. And it just kind of like to level up a little bit. And I think this question really interesting I saw, and I think probably is the $1 million question. I really would like to hear how Jennifer would kind of take on this. So the question is, what are skills or techniques that I can use to land a job that I want?
Well, not easy answers. I think, well, if we're talking about, let's be a little bit more specific. Like if we're talking about the interview process, I think it's easy enough to say, to kind of like read off your resume in a sense, like, oh, this is my background. I think instead of reading off your resume, if you're able to tell a story about your background, or like an interesting, or like a pivotal moment in your career, in your as a student, something that you came to some sort of realization that you can then teach your interviewer. Because I think when you're interviewing, you come from a place where you think that the person interviewing you like knows everything already and you're trying to impress them. But the fact is, in human interaction, is that we can all learn from each other, no matter what level, no matter if you're a student starting out or if you're at the professor level. I feel like there's always opportunity to learn. And if you can impress upon them, kind of some sort of realization that you've come to, and tell that story around it, and how your experiences, your background have led you to that realization. I think, that's kind of one way. I think I've lost the initial question. Gee, so put me back on track if
No, I think it's still quite relevant. I think maybe uh, I wonder if people wanted something more practical or specific on
Mhm,
skills or techniques that maybe you have used in the past to help you
mhm.
get the job that you want,
Yeah.
and that worked really well.
Yeah. Um, so I would say that I'll tell maybe a little bit of a side story right now. But in my little reinvention of myself, going to public health school, I decided I wanted to work on public speaking. And that took me through like a whole zigzag course of one, I took a public speaking class. It's kind of very obvious, an obvious thing to do. But maybe not so obvious was I took an acting class, which was more like improvisation. And instead of memorizing lines, it was more around being able to express your emotions through movement and movement only, not using words. And you would think like a public speaking class would be all about talking and using words. But in order to do this acting improv, it required losing inhibitions. And I think in some ways that's an important skill to have, to sort of like loosen you up and make you more human. And if you're, I was very uncomfortable doing these ridiculous things in front of other people. But we're all ridiculous at some point. And so sort of just like taking that perspective that we're all experiencing the same sorts of things, same sorts of fears, same sorts of insecurities. Um, Again, I think, just taking things into perspective where you're not thinking that you're inexperienced when you're going into a situation. Um, just trying to find, that commonality with people. And then I did have another thought around specific skills. I think, LinkedIn, I think is a tremendous resource. Um, I would encourage people to kind of put themselves out there and start connecting with people that you may not know, building a brand for yourself. So through my work with back to FANIC, the Public Health Association of New York City, I just became present. I was that person that people knew they could come to me and ask more about FANIC, for example, just to be a resource to other people. And building, I was able to build a brand for myself in that sense. I was on Twitter, now X. I was very active there and connecting with people, so that if you thought of, who in New York City is working in public health, I could be one of those people that you think of because I was just around, whether it's on the internet or at these public health events. So I would encourage people to also think about building that brand, whatever that is. That's your own personal, what I want to be seen as the expert in. So that's just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I was just looking at the comments. I think Mark mentioned personality is important. I completely agree. I think it's the human interaction again, right? How you show your charisma. Everyone has their own charisma and the way that attract people, and I think that's really important. You don't want to be perceived as just someone who gets the job done. You want to be perceived as a person that people love hanging out with, even outside of work, or they see you as inspiration. They want to kind of come to you when they have some problems or challenges. And that's going to build the trust really well, right? Because ultimately, team is about building the trust and confidence to get things done together. Um, I think, I agree with Jennifer on kind of, you know, the whole journey of landing a job, right? Not just about coming to a phone or office to do an interview, which is an important part of it. But if you think about the job process is really starting outside first. Like, you certainly want to do some research about the job you really want, to understand, the company, what the company does, what are they trying to do in the future, and what are the challenges they may be facing right now. Even if it's not that deep and accurate, that's okay, right? It shows people you have done the work and you're trying to speak the same language. That's going to earn their trust and the respect as well. And I think the network Jen mentioned, kind of going to events. There are so many events right now in the city, right? Those big companies, small companies, startups, they all have their own kind of community. And I don't think it will be hard for you to find an event to go and looking for people to kind of exchange ideas and understand, hey, maybe you want to land a data science job in Amazon. You find an event that has these people around and just go there and ask, what's your day like, right? What do you do in their job? And they may tell you something that you don't know before. That could help you think about the process as well. And last point I want to comment on is when you actually go into the interview process, and this is something I think what serves me really well. I've done a lot of interviews from internship to like employment, and now I'm interviewing other people. I think you definitely don't want to make the interview process as like question and answer. Like, you're just answering someone's question, right? And I believe like even the interviewer doesn't like that experience too much because that feels like they're just doing their job and things. I think what you can bring a light to this process, it just make it really natural, make it like you're meeting a new friend, meeting like you're talking to a colleague or something. And sometimes it really helps when you ask questions back. Um, and I think, I remember one time like I was in the interview and I literally asked like, what is the hardest thing you're currently working on? And that person actually start to kind of open up and talk about like, hey, I'm working on this thing really hard. I tried these things I don't know how to do. And you suddenly become a sinking partner with that person, right? And that's important because part of the reason people do interviews, yes, they want to test your particular skill, they want to test your knowledge, but also they're testing the chemistry, right? What you would imagine like when that person stop that conversation, go back to the manager or someone else, they're gonna say like, I love talking to this person, I love talking to this candidate, right? It makes me feel like I can work with him or her if we hire him or her, right? So I think those you can go beyond that kind of testimonial, I think from an interaction point of view. So just kind of make it natural, relax. It's not a big deal if you don't land that interview. There's a lot of opportunities, right? So definitely feel like, hey, I'm having fun here. I'm learning something. I'm also trying to share something I know you may not know. So that would be helpful.
Yeah, I like what you said about being a thinking partner. And I think coming into the interview, anticipating maybe what some of their problems might be, so that you feel prepared, that you're not, just completely taken unaware during the interview, is helpful too. It helps you feel more prepared when you really start to put yourself in the shoes of that role, and anticipate what some of the challenges might be, and speak to how you've overcome some of those challenges in previous roles as well. I Speaking of LinkedIn, I actually came across something today, where a woman was talking about, what questions do you ask during the interview? And very frequently at the end of the interview, they'll say, do you have any questions? And what she likes to ask is, do you have any reservations or concerns, given the experience that I've shared with you, about my ability to perform in this role? And then, that sort of flips the tables. And, you know, if there's something that they're wondering about, like, oh, well, you know, I'm very concerned, like this role requires you to be really good at Excel, um, to use your example, G. And it doesn't sound like you have that. And then that could be your opportunity to, you know, convince them otherwise, that maybe it's true you don't have great experience with Excel, but I can say, like, I'm a fast learner. I was able to, you know, ride a bike within, you know, in the span of a day, or, you know, just throw out examples of how that's okay. Or you can say something like, if I, you know, if I land this role, the first thing I'm going to do is, if that's important to my success here, the first thing I'm going to do is take a class, or, you know, I'm going to learn that skill if that's really important to you, so that you have a plan. You know, I think it's hard to find a candidate that checks off all of those boxes, that might be in the job description. And speaking of which, would also like to encourage people to apply anyway, even if you don't check off all the boxes. If you check off 50% of the boxes and you feel quite confident that you could acquire these skills. I mean, it's one thing if it requires a PhD in computer science and you don't have that, like zero programming experience, you know, that's one thing. But if you do find that there could be transferable skills, and as a clinician, and I've been in a lot of clinician groups where they talk about this, you know, this, like, I've been a clinician, all I've done is treated patients. I don't know the first thing about business. Well, there's so many things that you do as a clinician, that can apply. You know, as a clinician, you have to evaluate the situation very quickly, whatever situation that might be, and then produce a plan. And that could be just, you know, pretty immediate if you're in the emergency department. And these are things that happen in a business. You have to evaluate, assess, react immediately sometimes. And so I feel like just finding that common thread, when you feel like you don't have that bullet point on the job description, and just being creative about it. Easier said than done, I know.
That's a really good point. I think last point I want to touch on, I think we should leave some time maybe for questions, right? Just naturally coming. But last point I want to make is that kind of interesting being on the both sides of you know, the kind of the job hiring process. I think it like depends on the company you're looking to work in. I think smaller company like startups and the corporate are pretty different in terms of how they value the talent. I would say, you know, back in when, you know, I was working in a corporate and going through their process, they're much more standardized process for evaluating a candidate, right? Like you have a few round of like maybe a tests and a few round of like interviews with different roles, and at the end of the day, they have a committee internally voting on kind of the scores on this candidate, and every company does it differently. So it's much more rigorous, I would say, and you do have to kind of prepare maybe more purposefully on those things. For startup, for example, or quite opposite, at least in my case, is that it actually focuses much more on the soft skills. It actually much more focused on the little bit kind of abstract quality that you had, and they draw those understanding from the type of things you have done before, right? So when you present in your resume, by the way, one tip I have is that don't when you're interviewing, probably don't start with repeating the same thing in the resume, because like people already read that. But if it's an important experience, you definitely want to zoom into it. And when you describe those experience or like, you know, learnings, the person on the other side are thinking about, okay, this is interesting. This is not exactly what I'm looking for now, but if he can solve that, he or she can solve that, am I confident this candidate can do the job I want them to do, right? So that's really soft skill thing. And I think in startup, it's much more, I would say it's much more spontaneous sometimes. It's look, for example, we don't really care about degrees. I think a lot of startup really doesn't care about degree, master, PhD, really not a big difference. But like the way you talk about your experience, the the kind of way you approach a question or problems, those things are really matters. Those things really tells you how you think through things and how you leverage resources. And are you going to challenge the question I ask, or you just like gonna go with it or something like that? I think that would make a slightly difference in terms of valuing the candidate for a particular job. So yeah, I just want to point it out because if you don't have the experience with one type of company, you're interested in that company, it might surprise you. So
Okay, so let's open it up.
We do have one question in the chat from Leslie. She said, would you say that this is the outlook of most employers? So being able to get your foot in the proverbial door with these other skills.
I think I'd have to agree with what she just said, that startups tend to be a lot more nimble. And in a startup, I think most people that are hired end up having to wear multiple hats because there just doesn't exist, the employee pool to draw from when it comes to solving a problem in a startup. I will say though that even established, very established large companies can have a startup component to it especially when you're talking about innovation, where you're doing something that's never been done before. And so, there aren't established processes. And again, you're also looking for, being able to fill in gaps that exist. So I think it might be harder to get through that initial round where they might be just, they get 1,000 resumes and they're just looking for certain keywords in your resume. That might be more difficult to do at a large corporation, but that's where your network really can play a large role. And to be transparent, I mean, I am at Samsung because of somebody I know. He was able to make the right introductions, and I still had to prove what was on my resume and all through the interview process, but it definitely helped a lot that I knew this person, because I would have gotten lost in that initial round of screening resumes. So I would say like never stop networking. It doesn't have to be, sort of like, I always thought of networking in a negative way, like you're always just out to see what that person can do for you. And it doesn't have to be that way. Gia and I met at an event and we just got to chatting, and it turned out, even though we have very different professional backgrounds, we have a lot of commonalities. And so I think, and I hope I'm not presuming too much, G, but I think we're able to form a friendship like right away. And those are the connections you make at some of these networking events. And it doesn't always happen that way. Some people are all about like, what's your title? What company do you work for? See you later. Like if it's not important to them. So I think, kind of finding your home, a place where you're comfortable, and HitLab is that for me.
yeah, that's very true. And I would just share a quick story. Kind of, we actually hired someone from CUNY through the talk I gave last time, and she was one of the audience to ask multiple questions and just leave a very strong impression about how she thinks, how she talks. And then maybe after a few months later, she reached out on LinkedIn and like, hey, I saw. I mean, we were not even hiring. She just asked like, hey, are there opportunities in your company that I can work on or something I can do? and that's an opportunity she created for herself, right? So I think it's a very real, like the world is very dynamic. Like, when you are doing the networking, like Jennifer said, anything could happen. If people like you, they will create some opportunity for you, right? There's no, there are hard constraints on that. So definitely, if you don't ask, you don't get, right? So you got to be really kind of going out for that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We do have another question in the chat from Katrina, who asked, what are your thoughts on what impact you think AI embedded in the hiring process will have on landing roles, especially first roles out of school or grad school?
I'll let you take that one, Jie, being the AI expert.
Well, I mean, I actually, so I know AI, it's gonna come, right? AI is gonna be a process of filtering out a lot of information, including the hiring process. I think it's already been used to filter resumes and others. And obviously not just the first stage, but later on, it might evaluate the person from a different angles. Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's a really interesting question. Almost like a little bit philosophical, but I would say I'll give you a kind of a different angle. Maybe not what you expect, but I'll give you a technical angle. Is understanding how the AI is built, right? How the AI system built is that there's a training data that someone called expert that claims these are good data, good examples. And they want the machine to learn to tell these are good examples from not so good examples. And the kind of judgment they place on these examples are still going to be relevant and aligned with the real world experience, right? So I think I think we understand that philosophy. When you think about the system plays into it, I think there's always going to be kind of a standard metrics, standard merits that people would think these are good to have. If you check these boxes, your score is going to go up or something like that. But also, I think people are very careful about deploying these systems to not creating too much noise or bias. And although like there's no certainty to see like what system exactly in place, I think first you just be yourself. Definitely showcasing what you're good at, what you can provide the values about, and kind of have some kind of maybe some wisdoms to consider what the system will look at in terms of dimensions and make sure you can check those boxes instead of being randomly filtered out. So I think, yeah, I think it's hard to say. It's really exactly how it will impact you, but I would say just be yourself and do what you think is right in terms of providing your background.
Thank you both so much. It was such a naturally evolving conversation. And I think that speaks to what you said, Jennifer, about what it means to make meaningful and genuine connections within a networking space. And I'm sure that everyone here gained many either important pieces of advice for how to move from here to job interviews, or how to maybe on a more soft skill level take a new approach to networking and to the way we build our professional and life relationships. So thank you again. We have a couple minutes left. Is there any final thought that either of you would like to leave us with before we end the evening?
I have one. So I think it's being that I think most of the folks here are current students. I would just say take advantage of that student status to explore, to take risks, talk to your professors, depending on what your interest is in. Just keeping that open line of communication, because if you express to them like, oh, I'm looking for, something in environmental science or whatever it is, then the next time some opportunity comes along that is in that line, they'll think of you. So just really putting your want out there in the world, but also directly with people that you see every day at school.
Yeah, I think the thing I want to leave with is always something I tell people is that you will never be ready. If you are thinking about doing something, just start doing it, and you will find this is not exactly what you thought about. So don't waste time hesitating or overthinking or planning. Just start doing it. Like Jen said, you talk to people, learn about the real world experience, and yeah, you will get what you want.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. I wanted to add just that I put in the chat now that career resources, including the recording of this masterclass, are on our Handshake resources section of that website for all students and alumni. So the link is in the chat for you to join, to claim your account that we've already preloaded for you, or to go through this link to find the recording, which we'll have up for you tomorrow. And then the career fair information is in the chat as well. So we'll make sure to include those links in the follow-up email from this as well. So I want to just thank everybody for joining us this evening, especially for so many of you who come again and again to these master classes and to the events that we host. It's incredibly meaningful and and joyful to see you all here, and to know that it matters that we host these events and that these connections we're making for you are valuable. And so with that said, thank you so much, Jie and Jennifer, for your time and for sharing such incredible advice with us today. Thank you all. We'll have a, see you soon. Have a nice evening.
Thank you so much.